My name is Nicole Moore, and I'm the Director of Education here at the National Center for Civil and Human Rights, where I have been for the past 7 years.
Awesome. I'm Bart Glasgow. I'm an attorney here in the Atlanta area.
I'm Coley Glasgow. I'm a dental hygienist in the Marietta area. Yeah.
Well, welcome to the center.
Thank you for having us and for the wonderful tour. Even though I know it was partial, we're going to have to come back and fully experience it.
Absolutely, and I think that's where I kind of wanted to, ask if you all, it was brief, but I still think it was very striking, some of the places that we went to. What takeaways do you have? Or any thoughts?
There was a lot of history, and I'm still processing that I have not heard of. I've heard just the tips of the iceberg, but not really see the depth and the blood, sweat, and tears that people came together and unified to make things right and equal for everyone. And that touched my heart. I love it.
For me, some of the same. I did study this, and I was a political science major in college, and wrote my senior thesis, I think I told you before we started, on Martin Luther King Jr. and Gandhi and Henry David Thoreau, and studying their civil disobedience movements, and so I had learned a lot of it. But then it's striking to see that how many different people participated because the cause was just. It wasn't just black, it wasn't just white, it wasn't just male or female, it wasn't just young, it wasn't just old, it was across generations, it was across the sexes, it was across people of different skin color, and I think that when you're sitting there at that lunch counter, and I know that I cannot, it's disingenuous to say that I could experience what they experienced, because I couldn't, because I can't. But to get a sense of it and to understand what they went through, and that, yes, Dr. King was the one that we talk about the most, but that it took people sitting at the lunch counter, it took Rosa Parks sitting in a bus, it took all of these others doing the right thing. Dr. King may have, given them the aspiration and the inspiration, but it took a lot of people to do what needed to be done.
So let's talk about the lunch counter for a little bit, because y'all had a bit of a moment there. It was kind of like this. And when visitors come to the center, it's one of the things that I think that we're really strong at is telling the stories. And we use our archival footage, we use primary sources to really do the talking for us. Like we don't have to say anything. We have the footage, we have the photos. And then we have experiences like the lunch counter. And the one thing that I always ask people once they're done is, are you okay? Because it can be a lot. And Cooley, like you said, it's a lot to process, just the whole experience. But then also, I ask people to reflect, and you don't have to answer this out loud, but think about, could you have done that? And I think when we look at history or how it's often presented to us, it is the movers and the shakers, but it's not so much of, well, how did we get to that point, or who helped them get there? And I always leave that lunch counter question as a thought piece, because some folks are ashamed when they're like, I couldn't do it, and they feel bad. But we all have roles that we play in society. Some of us are your frontline activists. Some of us are out there marching. I am not that one. My role is education. My role is supporting. And so when people do the lunch counter, I always encourage them to not just think of those actual sit-in participants as the end-all be-all, because we need to acknowledge their sacrifice, but we get wrapped up in that fact of, I have to be that person. What if I'm not? Somebody's got to make the sandwiches, right? Because these kids aren't getting fed. Somebody's got to be there with a towel to help dry them off. Somebody's got to get them there, and somebody's got to safely lead them back. And if they are arrested, somebody's got to pay the bail. So what I love that we do is, yes, we have those key figures. We have King, we have Parks, But we also have the Claudette Colvins, the student leaders. We have the Ella Bakers and how she mentored and guided the Little Rock Nine. And I think it's important that when we think about how we talk about this particular history, that we dig deeper. We do a great job of that with our exhibits, but I also encourage people to take those tidbits that they've learned or things that they've known and then say, okay, so what's the footnote under this? What piece didn't I know about? But now I want to know, like we were talking about the Freedom Rides and how in 1947 you had CORE's Ride for Racial Reconciliation. Who was on that ride? What clergy was represented there? I love that you were thinking and that you discovered, wait a minute, I didn't know this. I didn't hear about that. And I think that's the strength of what we do. We could tell you the same old stories all day long, but that doesn't get to the heart of the why. And like I kept saying on the tour, in order to understand where we are right now, we need to understand those layers. I Have a Dream is a great speech, but again, the first 5 minutes of it, it'll get your life. Letter from Birmingham jail, it'll gather you really well. But it's also then reading the letters that freedom riders wrote their parents. It's understanding that Emmett Till's murder sparked his peers. And it's realizing that all of us have to be cognizant of those roles. And all of us have to be cognizant of those events in order to understand each other. Everything works as a domino effect. We looked at the segregation, we looked at the laws, but we also looked at Black excellence. And we understand that, yeah, we can survive. In a lot of instances, we can thrive, but we need to be able to do that outside of the boundaries of our neighborhoods. We need to be able to show that excellence everywhere. And understanding then that when we break that down, why was it so important that Mamie Till showed her son? Why was it so important that that sparked Claudette to understand her constitutional rights? Why did this happen? And then how do we fix it? It is in those legislative changes. It is in those small pieces, because at the end of the day, we can march, we can walk, we can ride, but if we don't change laws that have been put in place that continue to be an obstacle, we literally will spin our wheels. And so I think one of the things that I did enjoy watching y'all kind of go through the exhibit was, one, I know y'all needed more time, that's fantastic, but also I could tell that you were gravitating to some of the narratives that you hadn't heard and kind of like, I mean, this is familiar, but what about this, and how they married together. So was there any one particular story that you were just like, how did I not learn this? Or how did I not know this?
I would say that Claudette Colvin, you know, that she had ridden the bus a year before Rosa Parks. But then again, and how much younger she was, but yet she still did the right thing. And I think that that's really, you talk about the stories, you just have to tell the stories. I think that's a testament to the justness of the cause, because you just have to tell the story. And there should be something inside of you that says this is just, that, you know, this should happen. I think that, so anyway, I guess for me, it was probably that. I thought Rosa Parks was the first one who had kind of done, you know, sat in a bus when she wasn't supposed to, but to find out that it was this younger girl, hey, it gives me encouragement, because it's, you know, it's not just, and not to take the responsibility away from people who've been on this earth a little longer, you know, but you know, that young and old you should all participate in what's just.
And it was actually 4 women before Rosa Parks.
There was 4 other women? Mm-hmm. Wow.
Mm-hmm. And so I think it's important to know that, and that's the other thing too. So Rosa Parks is a great example. Everybody, we've heard the story of she was tired, She wasn't physically tired, but she was tired. But she was also, that was strategy. She was a secretary of the NAACP. She was an activist. She had been doing this work. And so it was purposeful. And that's something that a lot of people are just now realizing when they dig deeper into her story. So I love that you picked up on Claudette, like this 15-year-old who was like, I know my rights, and my rights are being violated right now. So helping people discover those stories, that brings me joy. Coley, what was something that you kind of were like, wait a minute, what?
Well, the Freedom Riders, I just was not familiar with that part of history, and how men and women together, just organized together. We have a plan. We're going to proceed with the plan in love. And if something happens to me, I did this out of love for mankind. And that was just very touching for me. And to see all the people who were arrested and that they stood for justice and equality and for everyone.
And one thing about the Freedom Riders is they came from all over the country. Once you start really digging deep into that roster of who was on what bus, you'll see people from Berkeley, you'll see people from Oregon, you'll see people from New Jersey, and they were all coming to ride to fight the injustice of, I mean, again, you can't go to the bathroom. Like, how insane is that?
Right.
Just because, and I guess that's the blessing today, is that we can't, sometimes it's like, I can't fathom that. But to not be able to use, for Coley and I to not have to go to separate restrooms to do the same thing, which is just, so Freedom Rides, a couple of sources you should really dig into. It is really, really an interesting portion of, well, I'll say the movement as a whole, but just that portion of, again, desegregating, not just the interstates which had been desegregated, which again, that question of how do you segregate an interstate, but also the court case with that, but how they were fighting to implement, like, Boynton versus Virginia said this, we just want to get some water and get on the bus and keep moving. So I would recommend Stanley Nelson's Freedom Riders. It was an American Experience documentary. It was fantastic. Has my favorite documentary line ever in it.
And that's a documentary called Freedom Riders?
And then Raymond Arsenault, he wrote the book Freedom Riders, which is a very extensive history on the rides. I know that you were intrigued by how many clergy were on the ride. So it has all of their names, it has some stories, but I think that would be, as you dig deeper into that, I think you'll be blown away by it, because it'll also then take you through when they were arrested, when the buses were bombed, but also kind of give you a little bit more history of Parchman Prison in Mississippi. And so that snapshot that you see on the bus is just the arrest that happened in Jackson. Wow. So that's not including Rock Hill, that's not including Anniston, and when you come back, watch the film. We didn't get to the film, but you'll want to watch the film, because I think that'll give you some more snapshots into it. But yeah. What is another takeaway that you all had?
When, at the end, when Dr. King was basically delivering his own eulogy, and he's bringing Matthew 25 into it, which is, for Coley and I, we both follow Christ, and so your question earlier about would you do something like this, I pray the answer is yes. I mean, Christ wants us to. He wants us to deny ourselves and to be willing to lay our lives down for a friend, and even for an enemy. And but seeing, he said, don't talk about the awards I won. Don't talk about the Nobel Peace Prize. Don't talk about the things, the degrees or anything like that. Talk about the things that I did to show compassion, to visit those that are in prison, to clothe the naked, to feed the hungry. And those are things just right out of Matthew 25 that Jesus had told that this would be a disciple of mine, a person who does this. And it gets to the point where, our pastor last Sunday was teaching on the Good Samaritan, and he said, it doesn't matter what is on your sign, or I'll enlarge it, on your social media post. It matters what you do. And so that he concentrated on that, because I think so many times that the world just concentrates on all of your accomplishments, your awards, things you got, and not to put too graphic a point up, but the Bible just calls all those things, filthy rags. What you actually do to help the less fortunate, the least of these, and as we're doing them to the least fortunate, as we're helping, we're doing them unto Christ Himself. So to hear him say that, just an amazing life, and then that's what he wants to be remembered, and even in that to inspire others to do that. So I was taken by that.
And for you, because I loved your major instinct, and I love when people really sit with it. I gave Coley some homework. I'm gonna give you some homework. Okay. I would recommend reading the entire Drum Major Instinct speech.
The entire what?
The entire speech.
Drum Major?
Yep. So that was the last minute and maybe minute and a half of it.
It was called what name?
The Drum Major Instinct.
Speech.
The Drum Major?
Instinct.
Instinct? Mm-hmm. Okay.
And you can find it on the Stanford University has a basically a King Center. Dr. Claiborne Carson was asked by Mrs. King to basically collect and gather Dr. King's papers. He helped us with our King Gallery, but for the past couple, and I mean a couple decades, he just recently retired. He was running the King Center at Stanford University, that archive. I do believe they have the audio of it, but they also have the written speech. It was his last sermon at Ebenezer, and it goes, there are moments, I like to call them moments with Martin, where I think I know, and then he yokes me all the way up. Drum Major Instinct is a great speech because it does hit on what you're talking about, but he goes even more in depth. He says how we get here to why people want to be acknowledged for the accolades. But then, are we doing it because it's right, or are we doing it because we want to be acknowledged? And then I think once you get to that end part of it, like he lays it out, he literally snatches all the hair off everybody's head, leaves them bald, but then says, but this is how we lead that life. So I think you'll really, really enjoy the full text of that.
Yeah, a good pastor often does that.
Yeah. I was just
they should do that.
It's just like, I feel some kind of way.
Yeah.
And I think you'll really, really enjoy the breadth
absolutely.
of it. All right. So I know we've been processing, been talking about that. What questions were sparked as we were going through?
I'm still soaking it in. I'm one of these that just has to process for a while. That's just, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess some of the questions that I guess I have, because you're the director of education, I was reading a little bit of your bio, and I'm assuming teachers and school districts, others come to you for help. And how do we really teach this in an impactful way? And as we're going through this journey, and I'm thankful to go on this journey to just be able to talk to experts, and I just pray that this kind of a show catches on, where we're not in this dialogue of, or not actually in dialogue, we're just attacking, or we're just putting our points on the board, because that doesn't do anybody any good. But when you talk to a school district about curriculum, how to effectively teach this so that kids really understand. I know Coley and I talked when we were younger. Alex Haley's Roots came on. We watched that. Harriet Tubman. We learned about Harriet Tubman in school, but we went to school quite some time ago. And so one of our curiosities is, how is it being taught? We have heard from a couple of experts that it may not be taught as, I don't know, it made a huge impact on me. I don't know why it did, but it made a huge impact on me. I could see the injustice of owning people, of slavery, of, you know, I mean, I could never, you know, it just, to me, it was so unjust. I was like, why didn't anybody see this? And the way they taught it, it seemed to me, but of course, you know, that it was genuine, that it was real, that it was thought-provoking, but you don't know what you don't know. So what do you suggest? What are some things that maybe, you know, that you advise school boards or school districts on how to teach this?
So exactly what I did with y'all, as we walked through and I showed you the footage, we showed you their words. That's what we do. That's how we help educators. A textbook can only do so much. But when you have primary sources and when you have the archival footage, it helps expand upon it. So for anyone that comes to the center, whether it be an educator or your everyday layperson, this is how we help them. Because, I mean, we have stuff that people didn't even know about. There's some footage in here, that funeral footage, part of that was found in a camera at a Goodwill. There's stuff that people have never seen. There are things that people have never heard. And so when they're able to see it, when they're able to hear it, when they're able to read it, not from me, but directly from those sources, that's how we help educators, because that's what they're looking for. They're looking for a primary source. They're looking for it to come directly from that person. So just like when we were looking at the segregationist, those quotes are words that those men said. And what we didn't get to was across from that were those TVs in the middle, archival footage of news conferences, of Senate hearings, of interviews that they did. And that's what we utilize. It's not that we have to make up anything. It's not that educators need to find a way. We say, here are your sources. Because at the end of the day, I think everybody wants to hear it directly from the horse's mouth. And then our job is to present the information, and I let you think about it. I let you form your opinions, just like I let you have that processing. That's what we do.
I love that. I think that is, you know, as an attorney, I'm always looking for primary sources. I mean, it's the law. I cite law. That's what matters, is the primary source. And to teach from primary sources like you're talking about, to me, I mean, I think we should teach the truth. I don't think we should varnish it or whitewash it or downplay it in any way, the good and the bad and the ugly. And so to go through those primary sources, like you see, you know, where the civil rights movement had you know, made a milestone. I mean, you know, achieved a measure of success, but then how they were set back and how that this has been a struggle. I think that's, I can't see anyone, and I know this story is talking about critical race theory and should it be taught in school, which I've come to understand may not be the question we should be asking, but really it's, I don't see anybody who could be against teaching the truth, primary sources, letting kids know and see, hear directly, like you said, from the person who spoke it even, read it from the person who spoke it, yeah, and then talk about that and discuss and dialogue, I think is always obviously healthy.
We utilize, you know what, and one of the strongest benefits, I think, to your point, like how do we help educators, is when they do bring the students and they had talked about something, and then they see it in the center, and they see it a little bit more fleshed out. A lot of, they'll ask, because, all right, here's the fun thing about the city of Atlanta. A lot of people call it the birthplace of the movement. And that could be argued, because Birmingham would like a word, Montgomery would like a word, Greensboro and Memphis, they all would like a word. But I think what is impactful is when we talk about Atlanta in the movement, and when we try to do that placement, a lot of the organizations were headquartered here. So you have the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, headquartered here. Their offices are still on Auburn Ave. SNCC was headquartered here. You have a lot of the Brain Trust, a lot of the organization, it's happening here. You're not gonna see necessarily a lot of the actual like big story. big stories of the movement happening in Atlanta because it's being developed here, but it's being carried out in other places. And so I think for educators, when they're trying to, centralize Atlanta in the movement, and they're like, I just can't, I can't. Y'all spent some time on that wall, the wall that looks at Atlanta as the city too busy to hate. I saw you looking at Dr. King's The Nobel Dinner speech. When educators and students interact with that, and then when they read that document, The Appeal for Human Rights, which was written by students, college students at the Atlanta University Center, then they start to think about, okay, well, who's Rosalind Pope? Rosalind Pope is fantastic. She is still around, and I love talking to her because then that's somebody who not only lived it, she authored the document. So you have the primary source, and in some cases you have the opportunity to talk to the primary source that wrote this primary source. Right. And I think that's the power when we talk about, how do we put Atlanta into the landscape of the civil rights movement, but also how do educators put Atlanta into the landscape of the movement? How do they bring that home? How do they bring that history to their students? It's around them. We can help them by getting them in contact with these resources. We can help them by doing workshops that, present, just like I said for you. I want you to read this particular speech. Sure. I want you to look at this documentary with this quote, because that allows them to then be able to footnote underneath. Okay, great. So what other documents did I need for that? Or what leaders of the Atlanta student movement can I have speak to my students to just talk about it, to talk with people who marched alongside King, who advised King, who bumped heads with King. That, I think, is our power and our strength. And I think that is what educators find the most insightful and the most helpful. Because like I said before, textbook might give you 2 or 3 sentences, maybe a picture. But when you come here, those 2 or 3 sentences end up being 20, 30 minutes of content that digs deeper. And when students see that the movement was led by them, and they can see themselves in the history, that's very powerful. And I think the best educators want to be able to make sure that their students can connect, that they can see themselves, that they can feel empowered, that they know that they're not too young to do. That's important. I think as adults, we gatekeep a lot. We second guess what our babies are capable of thinking. And it's always the best method to let them present information and then let them decide. That's how we get thoughtful folks. That's how we get a generation who can make choices, not based on what we've told them, but based on what they have learned on their own. That's our power. And that's, I think, for me, one of my number one driving forces when I work with educators. I help them help the babies. And in that process, as adults, we uncover stories together that we might not have learned. But instead of keeping that to ourselves, what we're doing is now we're giving the students an opportunity to not have the same experience as we have, where we're like, I didn't know that. We give them everything that we know. We tell them every story that there is to be told.
I think and to add to what you're saying, I think it even teaches, when we're teaching those primary sources and not gatekeeping, it teaches them how to think critically too, because they become more pensive. They're thinking about things and they're listening to people who said those words, and they're looking at footage of things that happen and photographs, and like you said, it just fleshes it out here. So while I understand the need for textbooks, but it does take away when a teacher just tells you what you're supposed to know versus shows you all of what happened and then makes you process that and critically think about it. So I love your passion about that. I think that's great. I mean, and I don't know how much Andy had told you about us, but I wanted to ask you this. Because we are, we're conservative, as far as our politics, but we hate being pigeonholed and we hate being stereotyped, just like everybody does. I mean, we literally, we follow Christ, so we love all, enemies included. And so it's just doing the right thing, no matter what the cost is, and so. But there seems to be a lot of misinformation, a lot of, no offense to present company with the media here, but it seems like a lot of times the media picks the most polarizing things. So when you're looking at critical race theory, you hear about school segregating in Atlanta students into different classes, or you hear about a school or a university course where the teacher wants, segregates the class, makes the white kids sit in the back, but we don't even. In other words, to conservatives, I think some of that could just be misinformation, could be just picking the story that's going to grab the audience, make everybody talk about it. Obviously, it sells ads. So on their news broadcasts, and what would you say to that kind of I think misinformation, to clear up that misinformation? Because talking to you, and that's what I think this whole show is about. Talking to you, I mean, I think we have at the core a desire for education and for understanding where we were, from the original sources, and processing that, where we are now and where we're heading to. I think we both have that core, that common belief and that passion. So what would you say, people that think that, they're trying to put this into schools or that into schools, and what would you say to that to try to clear up?
I'm thinking. I have a couple of thoughts. Honestly, it goes back to what we were just talking about. Doing the work yourself, doing the research yourself, doing the homework. Let's be honest, history is ugly. It doesn't feel good all the time. We need to be okay with that. But we also need to learn from that. Not everything is going to be a feel-good. Not every moment, like in this building, will be a march on Washington. It's okay. It happened. But we need to acknowledge it. We need to be determined to be better. But we have to look at a whole narrative and really dig deep. Find out why it makes us uncomfortable. Why don't we want to do that? Why don't we want to learn that? Why don't we want to hear that voice? Sit with it. I always tell people to sit in the discomfort and then grow from it. So I would say, to your initial question, we have to be willing to put in the work, to read the sources, to dig into those footnotes, and learn for ourselves. We talk a lot about this, the younger folks, and teaching them how to think critically. Us adults need to do the same thing. And I think at the end of the day, educating yourself is the most powerful thing that you can do, even if what you learn makes you feel uncomfortable. Good history does that. Good history makes you question. Good history makes you say, but that discomfort should drive you to ensure that what made you uncomfortable doesn't happen again. That, I think, is important. But let's be honest, people are afraid to not feel good. You always want to feel good. You want to be on that high. You want to be like, yes. But for many, it's hard. It's hard to find those moments of joy. It's hard to have that everything was sunshine and daisies, because it wasn't. But again, I think it is okay to sit in that, because that's what pushes us to grow. And that's, if there's a source and you're reading it, if there's a history and you're reading it and you're just like, I don't understand how this could have happened. How could we do this? But, that should be your motivation to then find not the part of the text that will make you feel better, but to find out, so how did we get here? When we look at oppression, what happened? How did one group decide that they would dominate another? Who said that was okay? When we look at particularly our history, the ugliness of lynchings, who said that was a good crowd activity? Who normalized that and made that okay? And why don't we investigate how we allowed that to continue? It does not feel good. It does not. But it's important, because if we're only looking for the stories that make us feel good, if we're only looking for the things that make us want to sit up straight with a sense of pride, we're denying ourselves a whole narrative. And so I think it's really important to dig deep. I always tell people when they're like, history is so hard, find a good fiction book to read afterwards. Do something outside. But don't shuttle for the sources that you think will make you feel better. Because also that's how we build empathy. When we understand what others have gone through, we may not have experienced it. We may not be able to fathom it. We may say, how? Hear those stories. To your best, put yourself in that person's shoes. But develop the empathy to understand that this is their story. We can't take that from people. And if it makes us feel some kind of way, good. Let's grow from that.
Time for one or two more questions.
All right. When you were talking about that, and I agree with that, I think that growth comes from discontentment. Growth comes from frustration, constructive frustration. Why can't I understand this? I remember when we were during law school, I had gone over to Europe, and I remember we went to one of the concentration camps, and I just remember walking through it and thinking, how could one people do this to another group of people and be okay with it? And it was so solemn and somber walking through there. I mean, I took lots of pictures of lots of things in Europe. I could not take a picture there. I could not, but it didn't make me feel good. But it's important to do that. And I remember, I think it was Eisenhower who made the people in the towns that were surrounding the concentration camps, the Germans, go visit those concentration camps after they were freed and see what was going on. And actually, to me, and to Barry, and it may not make them feel comfortable. And I know we do get that way especially with our kids. And this, I mean, let's face it, we have not faced real calamity in the United States. We have not, we have not, we want our kids comfortable. We want them to be happy and productive. But to me, part of making that work is to understand everything. And so to your point, I mean, teaching the bad things that make us uncomfortable, teaching the good things where it shall we overcome, teaching the bad thing again where it was knocked against, because there is this battle between dark and light. And we have to be the light, and the light is learning, and then not only learning but doing something with that light. So what would you say is the most common thing, like if a teacher or teachers, a school board comes to you and says, okay, you know, we need help teaching about this era, the civil rights movement, whatever it is. And I know that the textbooks only do a few lines. And I love what you said about the primary sources. What would you say is the most common piece of advice you give teachers to help them teach their students in class?
Be okay with not knowing all the answers. There's a level of respect that we want students to have for their teachers, but I think that respect grows tremendously when a teacher is vulnerable enough to say, man, I'm learning this with y'all. And when you have that, that's how you build a stronger trust with your students. We don't have to have all of the answers, but we do need to learn together. And so it's okay to not know something. It's not okay to teach it wrong, but it's okay to not know something and then work together to learn it. That's the most powerful thing. And I think when you hear about your teachers of the year, the students who talk about the teacher that they had 50 years ago, it's that one teacher that was okay with being vulnerable enough to say, I mean, we're gonna learn this together. I might have learned it one way, but we're gonna learn it. We're gonna take this new information that we found, these new sources that have been uncovered for us, and we're gonna walk through it together. That's what I would tell them. It's okay to not know. I mean, we do this all the time here. If a visitor asks us a question and we don't know the answer, I'm not gonna make anything up. I don't know. I'm gonna get on that. Here's my card. Email me this question again. I'll try to find an answer. And if I can't find an answer, I'm gonna direct you to somebody or someplace that will help. But my greatest thing is just, we're all growing. For the better, we're learning more about our history as a country with new sources. And this is a growth period, so let's learn it together. Let's process it together. That's the best thing.
Well, I had shared with you that I went to Tennessee State University, Meharry Medical College, and HBCU. And while being there, the first few weeks, it felt weird. But after that amount of time and being embraced and loved by my friends that I've made and the staff and the faculty at Tennessee State and Meharry, I felt like part of one big family. Now, I will share with you that I was there 2 years, and there were 2 different occasions where we were walking across campus, and a group of students walked up to us and said, "You don't belong here." That made me feel, I mean, I had never felt like that before, and then just going through the tour with you, it made me feel, it didn't make me feel any shame or guilt. It made me feel to see the love that people had for one another to stand together to make things right. And so I don't focus on those 2 bad situations. I focus on and remember the good times I had with my friends there and how I felt connected as part of the group at school there. And it really broadened my worldview. Because we both grew up in the country, I mean, in a pretty much predominantly white area. But I treasure my time at Tennessee State University. And it just empowered me to love all people, regardless of religion or color. I love how, it's like Jesus said at the end of time, there would be people of all tongues, all nations, all backgrounds praising the Lord. I look forward to that day, and I look forward to it now, now. And so this time here with you and learning this history has just inspired me. And it brings unity, I believe, to all. And that's what I want. That's what we want.
Yeah, we need to stop that,
Yeah.
that tribalism that seems
Yes.
to be so divisive. And I'm just going to make confession right now that, you know, when they just made Juneteenth the federal holiday, okay, and so you had groups supporting it, right? But then you had groups that were coming against it. And you're like, well, what tribe do I belong to? Where should I fall in? Then you look at what Juneteenth's about. And you're like, who could have any problem with making this a federal holiday? I mean, the last slaves who learned that they were freed, that the Confederacy had surrendered, June 19th. Who could say, you know, oh, I'm against this? I mean, we jump because we feel like, oh, well, if this group's for it, then I have to be against it, or if this group's for it, I have to be for it. And that's not the way it should be. We should look at it, and so you start digging in, and that's what we try to do. What is this Juneteenth? Oh, wow. So we educate ourselves.
That is,
And we
wow.
look at it and we say, this should have been a holiday decades ago.
And I hope you had some barbecue and strawberry soda too to celebrate. I mean, it's people look at Juneteenth and I'm like, listen, it is a day of great jubilee.
Yes.
And then for the people who are still a little bit slow on the Jubilee bandwagon, I'm like, listen, barbecue and strawberry soda. Get your life. But then, you know, I use food as an entry point for a lot of, you know, how do we build bridges? But Juneteenth, man, listen, you got, for folks, and I know we're wrapped up, so this can be like a casual thing. You're good. You're good. I'm like done. Okay, so first of all, thank y'all for coming and sharing this experience with us. I hope that you did learn, and I hope that you continue learning.
Absolutely.
And come back and see us again at the center.
We use food too as a form of outreach.
So that was your wrap up.
And I was